Hey, y'all. Craig. Whew. Well, politics are starting to boil over, and man, it's always surprising to see what kind of boils up to the surface, isn't it? Obviously, we're watching Joe carefully, trying to determine is everything all right with Joe. Some days he speaks okay. But boy, he never really answers questions. I mean, not real questions. He knows the people he's going to choose, and they know the question. He knows the answer. They're certainly not going easy on Trump right now. And there's a guy that I have to say, I mean, he will answer questions all the time, every day it seems. And it doesn't matter how outrageous. They'll ask him stuff that's just flat out insulting. And, he'll call him on it a lot of times, but he answers the questions. It's going to be weird if Trump were to lose. Are we ever going to accept politicians giving us politispeak, where they just sort of say a bunch of words that don't mean anything? Because now we're really, I mean, if you don't like the way Trump speaks, I understand, but the guy lays it out there. And I think that's great because I want to know what's going on. I want to understand the thought process. They tell us these are the programs, these are the laws we're working on, whatever, but you don't really get a sense of what they're really up to. They just give us a lot of pretty words and hope that we're happy and leave them alone. But during an election cycle, anything goes, right? And it's the other people who are speaking up because Joe isn't taking the time to get out in front of the press and in front of people. You've got all these other folks who are kind of stepping up there for him. And we've spoken before about how, the Democrats kind of work en masse anyway. It's not really sort of like we have one leader and we're following, what he says. It's more like we're one big group. And we've determined that this is our platform and we're going to proceed in that direction. But, one of the things that stands out starkly is the military. I just sort of assumed that, well, they've got to love Trump. I mean, he's been plowing money in there, giving them new equipment, giving them a purpose, pulling out of these endless wars in the Middle East and where peace is starting to break out all over the place. Some real structure, and you figure the military would respond to that quite favorably. And certainly I think the rank and file love him. But boy, you see some nasty stuff come out of some of the command. And you wonder, say, wow, what do they know that I don't see here? And then, you have to kind of remember that, oh yeah, that's right. Obama got rid of about 200 of the lead commanders and replaced them slowly but surely with a bunch of people that think his way, right? I'd kind of forgotten about how disruptive that was. He didn't only sequester the money going into the military, which caused a lot of trouble, but he actively weeded out some of the old guys, the old hard asses, and put people in those offices that are progressive, think more along his terms. And so when you see some of these military guys saying, oh, well, if Trump gives a hard time after the election, we're going to remove him from office, stuff like that, which, violates certain oaths and directives. Now we got something that I don't recognize as the military that we're supposed to have, right? The military is supposed to work for the president under the president's direction, not the other way around. And that's pretty troublesome stuff. And, you see the how Trump has gotten rid of the racial diversity training. That's been part of the military as well. I actually wrote it down as Executive Order 13583, establishing a coordinated government-wide initiative to promote diversity and inclusion in the federal workforce. These programs, just like how I discussed earlier, how NASA was steered away from the whole space exploration program and was sort of converted into this stamp of approval process for all this environmental study and very specific environmental study, all about global warming, CO2, that stuff, not anything new, just down the old same corridors that Al Gore and company gave us. I think that was an utter waste of time and resources. But there's some extremely wealthy individuals who disagree. You see Jeff Bezos just donated a ton of money towards environmental studies, and what was it, like 10 billion or something like that? There's a lot of people pushing these old programs, and like I said, it's an election year, so a lot of these things bubble up, and you really you see the things that they're most proud of, the programs that they will not let die. And boy, the global warming thing is a big deal. I mean, the Green New Deal. There's no way, being $26 trillion in debt, that we can afford to explore the Green New Deal. We just can't. Even if it was the greatest idea ever, which it isn't. We just don't have the money. That's the truth. We have to buckle down at this point. We have to get really good at doing the things that we do, start the gears turning, and start paying the taxes that push down the debt. Sad, but that's the truth. I mean, it's hard to even figure out, what did we spend all that money on? I mean, I know since the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, we can sort of identify, we bailed out Americans, and we created programs to help companies stay financially afloat, for a few months. Probably not as much time as we're actually experiencing, right? I mean, who could have imagined we'd still be under all these restrictions? And here we are in September. I mean, I thought we'd be done with this a little after Easter. I think a lot of people did. So what we have, like I was saying, you've got the military that had been converted into something else, just like NASA was, just like so much of government has been. It's sort of adopted this new mission of environmental crisis. And I'm always asking why. We've done so much. We've spent so much money to clean up our act. You don't see the pollution like there used to be. Cars are much cleaner. Power plants much cleaner. But a lot of that has gone way too far, right? Cleaning up the emissions is one thing. Cleaning up your trash and all that makes sense. But that whole push of like, well, that's not going to go far enough. We've got to go all the way to like no fossil fuels, which doesn't make sense because we're already using it. It's sort of like, well, don't use firewood anymore because we've got electric heaters. Okay, that works fine in some circumstances, but the old standby works pretty good. Did cars replace horses? Well, yeah, for travel, but we still have horses. But the point being is that the push for the Green New Deal and all the technology that goes with it is only replacing what we already have. And it's replacing it with something that the people who make those things are big donors to the Democrat Party. Although they seem to believe in the Green New Deal and all that, I suspect that really there's a lot more about, hey, I want access to huge markets like I've never been able to have before. And I don't like trying to take on the oil companies, and I don't like to try to change people's minds about what's effective as far as transportation. I just want you to force this thing through so that people have to buy my product. And that's kind of what we've seen, right? There's the subsidies and everything else that go along with the electric cars or whatever the program is. You look at things like the windmills. None of this is new. Windmills have been around for a really, really long time, before we ever had electricity. the reason we replaced windmills with electric motors and things of that nature is because you can't always count on them. It's not always windy enough, or sometimes it's too windy, right? We need something that we can turn on and it runs. We can count on it because we need to convert product, right? And we have to do it on a reliable basis. And that's a concept that seems to escape the grasp of a lot of these politicians, with this whole lockdown and everything else. They're forgetting, if we don't stay busy, not only do we stay healthy by staying busy, but our economy stays healthy. And with the economy being sick as it is right now, we're not paying off that debt. We're not catching up on the rest of the world. We're just kind of stuck in this weird limbo. So many small businesses are never going to recover from this. There's no way. And you've got to wonder, what's the logic behind this? Why do these politicians invoke all of these restrictions when they know that it's strangling the economy? It's hurting the people, their constituents. But again, it's the election season. So what bubbles up there? Well, power, right? These guys love the power they have. A lot of these state governors, a lot of governors are kind of in a weak position where they don't influence the goings on of the state as much as the Congress does. And, there's very limited authorities that the governors have. Some of them took to this authority, which actually isn't really given to them. There's not a law passed that says you're going to have to don a mask. These things didn't go through the process. They're just mandates, and it's a little bit different. But yet they've utilized these things to the nth degree. We're all kind of scratching our heads at this point, saying, "Well, hold it. Who exactly said that? We have to stick with the masks, or we have to stay out of the restaurants, or bands can't play, or we can't have these gatherings," when you're seeing it happen in other places. It doesn't seem very fair when you see most of the world is getting back on their feet and getting back to normal, and we're still kind of stuck here, and we're asking questions, about like, well, how long do we have to do this? And they can't tell us the criteria. They tell us things like, well, once there's a vaccine, but we already know that a lot of people don't wish to take the vaccine, and I don't blame them. I'm probably not going to. And it's not because we don't trust Trump. It's we don't trust the vaccine. There's so much to it. I know they're testing it and they're doing everything else, but there's nothing about COVID-19 that I trust. We've seen just rotten all the way through this thing. So, I feel like since I've had it and so many people around me have had it, that we've got some immunities to it anyway. And it's going to do me just as much good as any vaccine will. But, again, it's election season. So, you see the vaccine come up a lot where Trump's saying, well, maybe it'll be along real soon. And really it could be, because they've been testing this stuff for several months now. We went over that on the timeline. It's well along, and there's several different companies working on it all at the same time. And what they're doing is they're ramping up and producing it while they're testing it, so that as soon as the test looks like it's successful and it goes to the FDA, and the FDA goes ahead and does their additional testing to it, as soon as it gets a stamp of approval, it's ready to go. They've already been ramping up the manufacturing side. But you don't hear about that kind of stuff. It's election season, so it's all about, well, Trump wasn't ready for this thing, which, is sort of ironic coming from the Democrats right now, because they were all about, you don't have to worry about this stuff till later, and now they're saying, oh, they were way ahead, or they would have been way ahead of, and Trump hasn't managed this thing well. And I'm like, first off, Joe, give me one example of a program you've been in charge of that you managed well. I'm not seeing it. I remember the summer of jobs, or whatever they called it, that he was in charge with, and they spent just gazillions of dollars, and you didn't see anything come from it. They didn't generate any jobs. They they floated a bunch of unions, which, it's funny when they pay the unions or they give the unions a break, all that money comes right back to the Democrats every single time. It's amazing the special favors that the Democrats get through unions, like the mail slowing down, stuff like that. But anyway, I look at all these different things that bubble up, and it just reminds me of how rotten some of these guys are. Looking back again at Biden, under Obama, I mean, they were spying on Americans through the TSA and other tools that we gave them until they got busted and told that, no, you can't do that. And then they abused FISA warrants. They just wouldn't give it up. You look at stuff like Uranium One, that's come up again, right? That's the whole reason the whole Russian collusion thing with Trump even came up, is because they were trying to create some smoke screen so that people would stop asking about Uranium One and Hillary Clinton's deal and Bill Clinton's deal with those guys and all. That's where that all came from. The whole Trump allegations are bogus, but it's not bogus on the side of the Clintons. They did some bad stuff there. Like impeaching the president, through that whole thing. I remember, Maxine Waters, impeach 45. And, since the day he was inaugurated, they're just relentless. They've been trying to find some way. Ukraine, why do they even bring that up? It looks bad for Hunter Biden at the very least, if not Joe. There's a whole full-blown investigation taking place. I mean, there's people being summoned to court right now over that. So, these things, they bubble up, and they keep bringing these things up in the first place, and it so surprises me. It's like, well, you're going to bring a lot of attention to that. And they feel like, no, I just got some horrible thing to say about Trump, and that'll be the end of it. It's like, well, no, because we're going to look into this, right? Like the Me Too movement, right? That started off with a big bang. A bunch of people got kind of sacrificed on the altar there, and then it just sort of, it became so overwhelming. It's like, wow, there's so many sleazeballs. It's just sort of like died out. It's gotten to the point now, like under Biden, it's like, oh, yeah, well, never mind. This Me Too thing, that was interesting in the past. But although I see that they're trying to dredge up some other news story about Trump and some lady from the past, I think a tennis player or something like that. I mean, so is some that say, wow, she just came out now after all these years and decided, wow, this is the time to tell my story. What else? Like global warming, that's always everyone's favorite thing. Remember, it was like man-made global warming and then just global warming and then climate change. And it's because, none of the old theories have stood the test. The CO2 thing, we know that the CO2 rises after the heat rises, so it's not the other way around. And now, there's new discoveries that indicate that our connection to the sun is probably the most meaningful and most impactful part of what regulates our atmosphere. And it's a very exciting line of science and kind of terrifying at the same time. But, it's just not as simple as they kept trying to make it out to be. And again, election season bubbles these things up. So it's like, well, what was that about? It's like, oh, it's trying to create a new tax. Oh, right, that was it. The carbon tax, right? That was the beginning of it. And the whole thing is like, oh, it's to punish the fossil fuel industry and to subsidize the Green New Deal industry. We're gonna trade this for that. That's what it's about, right? Oh yeah, politics. And then you speak of politics. How about China? We talk about that a lot. China's been gunning for the number one spot on the planet, for quite a while now, and we were the only thing really standing in their way. Russia truly wasn't. And, look at the fatal mistakes China's been making. Again, an election year brings all of this up. So you see how they're spending a lot of money trying to do everything from help sponsor a lot of these BLM protests that turn into riots. China's got a lot of involvement behind the scenes there. But so do a bunch of other groups, and that's kind of the crazy thing. You're seeing not only China, as far as outside, but you've got Iran, and you've got, of course, Russia to some degree. And then you've even got allies that are all trying to mess with our election, because they've got favorites one way or another, or they just want disruption. And they're seeing that, wow, there's a lot of disruptive forces here in the United States right now. So let's add a little fuel to the fire and see if we can't make something happen. But what's in it for them? Well, think about it. I mean, especially right now, China, Trump's tariffs and Trump's hard action against China after the COVID-19 pandemic, that's really causing a disaster. The whole world is turning against China, and that is causing them to take a hard look at their interactions in the past, and they see all kinds of corruption, just tons of it, because that's kind of how China operates. They're really good at finding people that they can corrupt, and using their influence on them. They'll do almost anything to get those secrets that they want in order to implement them in China, or technology, or whichever. Like with their Belt and Road Initiative in Africa or South America. I mean, they use that not only to build the infrastructure that they know these countries will never be able to pay for, but also to promote very corrupt politicians who will work with them to make sure that things are corrupted to the point where they can take things over. Corruption always works best when you've got a bunch of corrupt people all working together, trying to out-corrupt each other. And again, election season kind of brings that out. So yeah, China brings them up. The Middle East, I mean, look at what's going on there. Forever, I never thought in my lifetime I'd see peace starting to break out anywhere in the Middle East. But Trump's done a really good job of identifying the strongest players. For the longest time, we've been trying to deal with Palestine and, appease them one way or another. And I think Trump's looked at it and said, that's pointless. We saw how Arafat, even when Clinton offered him everything that he could possibly want, he ran away from the deal, right? They're not about the deal. It's about the politics. It's about the corruption. It's about, complaining and whining and having a place at the table to complain and whine at. So they've identified wow, there's a lot. Israel is kind of like the Silicon Valley of the Middle East, but you've got all these other nations that are very, very strong, and they do business together anyway. So having formal agreements with them and pushing kind of ever more farther away from Iran and their manipulation has done a tremendous deal for the Middle East and for the whole world, I think. Instead of trying to appease the troublemaker, strengthen up the strong ones and get them to the point where they're so strong that the troublemakers have to either give up or join in. I think that's a really winning way of going about it. But again, these things come up, during election season. Same with, throughout Europe. I mean, you see how the relationships have changed, how, a lot of European leaders didn't like Trump, but they like what he's been able to accomplish. And, there's a lot of progressive leaders in Europe that, the same deal. The people who live in those countries have gotten sick of them. They've gotten sick of trying to appease the world when they just want to make their country stronger so that they've got better jobs, more security. And, we're seeing it today. We're seeing how, some, like Merkel and some of the really strong progressives have nothing nice to say about Trump. But yet, every time there's a deal, they have to side with him, because it's just a better deal. It's going to help them. It's going to help us. So even if it isn't the New World Order, you got to put food on the table, But when we're talking about all that stuff and we talk about how, even the military has been weakened by, pulling almost 200 of our old leaders out through Obama's years, and replacing those leadership positions with people who are sycophants to the progressive idealism. And you see how they're acting now when Trump needs those leaders to stand with him under domestic issues and stuff like that. And you're seeing some of these guys get really slippery about it. Oh, no, we won't do that. It's like, well, no, the military is, that's the commander in chief. That's the guy you're supposed to listen to, and they're being insubordinate. Again, in an election year, this is the kind of thing you see, like, oh, we still have some work to do over there, too. Yeah, I love the way that that Trump just terminated this whole what do they call it, the diversity programs. I can't for the life of me understand why we would want to run these diversity programs in the military. The military is all about not being diverse. Okay, you're just a cog in the machine, and you get it done. You do what we tell you, and that's it. That's how the military works. And suddenly, create this need to be heard and understood, and feelings, and that doesn't fit. And this isn't going to fit within the format of this camera unless I quit now. So hopefully that was worth your time. Just things to consider and recognize when you see it happen in front of you. It's an election year, but this is when things boil to the surface. And just take a good hard look at it. Remember, when you're voting for or against all these concepts. If the thing didn't happen, at least the idea of the thing, is that what you want? Do you want to vote for a party that's constantly trying to cook up new ideas that make life harder? Or do you want to vote for a side that's constantly trying to cook up new ideas that are going to make this country run stronger? I go for stronger. Hopefully you do too. Anyway, thanks for listening. Have a great day.